Hello, I'm Liska.
And I'm Matthew.
And we work at talent.io. On Thursday, the 5th of July, we hosted a panel discussion on HR4Diversity about fostering diversity and inclusion in the workforce. The panel discussion was specifically aimed at tech startups in Berlin.
And of course, none of this would have been possible without the excellent contribution from our panelists, our attendees, and Oberhafen Canteen for providing a pretty magical venue.
This is a recording of the whole event, so if you want a condensed breakdown, we've also got 2 articles on Diversity and Inclusion 101 and the specific takeaways from the panelists, which we're linking below.
And without further ado, let's hand over to Inka Kretschmar, who was moderating the event on the evening. Enjoy.
Should we just do a quick round of, you have got the email, you seen everyone, but maybe just you can put faces to names. Just do a very quick round one-liner of who everyone is here on this lovely panel. So my name is Inka Kretschmar. I'm a leadership coach and trainer working with leaders individually, also as teams and organizations, very much towards strengths-based, inclusive leadership and culture.
My name is Kati Paishat. I'm currently working as a tech recruiting specialist at Native Instruments here in Berlin. Hello? Yeah, great. Before that, I've worked also in the tech recruiting sphere for SoundCloud here in Berlin and New York, and previous to that at a mobile gaming startup called Wooga. I'm very happy to see some colleagues and ex-colleagues and people from the network. I'm coming from a background I'm a recruiting consultant, and prior to that I studied psychology. I've been a founder of NGO initiative for women and education for the youth around topics like sexuality and education in Poland. But I've also worked around those topics in Portugal and Brazil before I started working as a recruiter. So diversity and inclusion has always been very important for me. And even now in the business context, I really enjoy having a little bit broader spectrum than just hiring and getting people, but looking a little bit beyond that.
Hello everyone, my name is Diana Șerpănescu and I'm very happy to be here this evening. I represent academia. I represent Weizenbaum Institute for the Network Society, which is a new initiative from the German government for studying the impact of digitization on society. I'm the team lead of the group dealing with the criticality of software systems, in particular criticality of artificial intelligence. And tonight I'm representing one of my students who is doing a PhD on the topic of bias in artificial intelligence, in relationship to artificial intelligence. Weizenbaum Institute is a very interdisciplinary approach to the study of the digitization. It combines forces from all the big universities in Berlin, from Technical University, from the University of the Arts, from Free University. We are represented from the side of technologists, from the side of social scientists, also from the side of the artists. We have very interdisciplinary teams. I'm having quite an interdisciplinary background myself. I have a PhD in computer science and a BA in performing arts. So we are very much researching topics about society and technology, and we are believing in the idea that interdisciplinarity, it's the way to approach those topics. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Nikima Steffelbauer. I guess the one-liner is that I'm a senior digitalization program manager by day, by night, or in addition to that, I'm the founder and managing director of Frauendu, which is an initiative that is a nonprofit based in Berlin, and it is focused on getting immigrant, refugee, and resident women interested in tech and interested in coding, be that in development, web development, be that in data science, or be that in any other area. that may not be familiar to them.
Hi, I'm Jen Bell, and I work at Clue, which is a health tracking app here in Berlin. And I work there currently as a writer. I started off in customer support, and now I'm writing primarily for the website. So I'm writing articles about menstrual health, sexual health, and also cultural topics that relate to this. And I'm also writing in-app text and sort of marketing text, but the main thing are these educational pieces. And aside from that, I've kind of appointed myself as the person who says everything is problematic. So I'm very excited to be here with all these panelists and hopefully learn something tonight.
Lena Reinhardt, I'm Director of Engineering at Circle CI. I've been in different management positions in tech companies for the last 8 years and have been heavily involved in diversity, inclusion, and hiring, and have done a lot of work in the tech community around those topics as well. And happy to be here.
Hi everybody, my name is Jamie Szymkowiak. I'm the Talent Acquisition Manager at Signavio, a German software company. I'm a disability rights activist, a successful campaigner, and a children's book author as well.
Thank you very much. So let's get started. One thing I think before, I don't think we necessarily have to discuss what the business case is for diversity and inclusion. There's so much research out there, and we know now it really does. If we do want to solve today's problems in a global world, we do need to get involved as many different brains as possible. And so it's not just about productivity. It's also just around imaginative problem solving. It's about innovation, better, less biased decision making. It's if we want to attract, retain, develop, and motivate talent, we need it to be more diverse. If we want our risk management to be more robust, if we want to really get customer excellence and want to be as diverse as our customers, we do need more diversity. And it is also around creating more meaningful and also less biased products and how we market them. So yes, if we want to excel as a business and we want to create something meaningful, we can only do this if we embrace diversity. However, and I just state this here, diversity without inclusion doesn't work. So let's just jump in, and as a warm-up, let me ask you, because I also don't really like these nouns what do they actually mean? What does diversity, what does that actually mean? I mean, is it really worth us still thinking in these stereotypes of gender, nationality, race? And what does it mean in Berlin in 2018? So whoever wants to jump in on that. What is diversity?
I'll kick off, I suppose. I think diversity is just a fact of life. You know, looking out at the audience here, you can see all different types of people. And if we were to go out on the street, diversity is just everywhere that we look. But it's inclusion that's actually the really difficult aspect within diversity and inclusion. And I think for me, the whole mantra behind this is trying to recognize the barriers that people face and trying to reduce and eliminate as many of those barriers as possible.
I would like to add to that something I've recently read on Twitter. So this will not be my original quote, but I really fell in love with the metaphor and add a third element to diversity inclusion, which is actually belonging. Because the metaphor went, diversity is like opening a party for everyone. Then inclusion is like sending the invitations, but belonging is when actually everyone can participate in that party, have fun, and take part in it, which I guess is maybe even the next step. Being in Berlin in 2018, I'm amazed by the diversity of people, initiatives, creativity, but there's still so much to do and improve that. I guess that could be the next step. But don't want to steal the conversation.
Lena, you looked like you wanted to say something.
How did you guess? I agree with the sentiments. I also agree that diversity is nothing without inclusion. I do think that with the diversity that we have in the population in Berlin, and looking at the diversity we have, for example, in the startup scene, or that we're lacking there, I do think we're still at a point where we need to talk about what you said, the stereotypes, the boxes to some degree, to make progress from where we're at. We're still at a point where only 28% of people in technology are women, and that's the year 2018. So I do think it's worth still talking about that, and in the end, getting to a point where diversity is something that we celebrate every day and not just during Pride Month or on Equal Pay Day in our companies, and make everyone feel like they belong.
So why is it still not happening? Why only 28%? Should we start with recruiting? So getting the people actually into the companies. What's the issue? It's a pipeline issue? Is it the recruiting processes? What is really stopping us getting a more diverse workforce through the door?
I would say it's both, and it's also about the mindset and the purpose of the company. Last month I participated in a similar panel where actually people started talking what does it mean to focus on diversity in the companies. And I said, well, the company, the executive team should start with the why, with the purpose. And it's not only, as you said, the business case, but it's about the mindset and about where as a company we would like to be, what do we want to tell to our customers and to convey. And the design of the process should really reflect that if you want to be truly diverse, inclusive, and inviting for all sorts of people and demographics out there. The barrier of entry, well, advertising positions with a crazy number of bullet points, vocabulary that is associated with a certain type of people, demographics, or preferences can easily distract the candidates from applying. And then it's very easy to say, well, we have a problem with pipeline. So thinking about why the company should be diverse, improving the employer branding, and the outreach to the communities that are maybe not that obvious, but still existing. There are so many communities of underrepresented, or as at one event I've heard, underestimated communities. Recruiters, managers, hiring teams should do their best to be heard in those communities. Then the next step, hiring process, making sure that the candidate experience is, really great experience for everyone, and that your company will shine in those practices. Think about the words that you use during the process. Think about how do you talk to the candidates and how do you assess their skills. Finally, being a recruiter, I'm also afraid that there is so many other companies that want to attract the same talent. So I have to think, how can I be a good advisor to people who are applying? Not only thinking, yeah, what does my company need, but think, what does this person need? So be a little bit more human in all that.
Anything? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I think it's very easy to talk about diversity in terms of it being a goal or an objective, and not really define it for oneself in the sense that I think in its most basic form, diversity is about experience. So it's about what types of experiences are valuable, how broad the range of experiences are that are valuable, and how people are used to thinking about the experiences of the users that they hope to have if they're building software products, and of the audience that they believe that they already have the attention of if they have, let's say, venture funding. So that's one of the points that I think is really often lost when we get into discussions about diversity as this far-off goal, that we've read about in Harvard Business Review that supposedly is connected to making more profit, but in fact it's about who are we trying to reach, how are we trying to reach them, and who might we alienate by accident, by omission, if we don't consider age, educational level, economic level, geographic level. A good example that I like to give is it's perfectly possible to have an amazing roadmap, an incredible vision of who you want your users to be. But if you look at Facebook when it started, and it was intended for an elite group of students at elite schools that excluded the vast majority of the population, and you see what it's become, it could never have become what it is today if it had said, well, we know our users because we are them, and you need to be an elite Ivy League university student in order to get our product. And I think that's something that more founders, more startup folks, more software employees and participants should think about when they're trying to figure out who they want to bring into the club and who they want to reach eventually with the outputs of their company.
So really thinking through the strategy beforehand. And I think this is also a really interesting point you make, because I find often we get a bit blinded by what diverse means. And when I'm in some of the young organizations that I work with, it's like, what do you mean? We're so diverse. We do actually have a good gender mix. We have 54 nationalities in our organization. And I say, what's the oldest employee? We have one guy who's 38. And I had this actually with the organization the other day that said, we don't hire anyone with a corporate background. I said, why? Oh, because they're really set in their ways, and and it's really curious, because I think we have to also look beyond that. That diverse really means, what do we also think of May looks less capable in a certain context, because our mental models tells us that, and to look at that, if that doesn't mean that therefore this is going to be no way. Sorry, Nikki.
I want to give her a chance to speak as well,
please. And I also would really like to carry on.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to the question about why so few women in technology, and also like why diversity is important in technology. I think it's very complicated and complex question to answer, and I think any attempts to simplify it are not inclusive enough, and it has to be carefully considered. Like my experience firsthand with technology and being involved in computer science for 10 years almost now. It's, for me personally, it was about the mindset. I think the technology comes with a certain mindset. Like technology is supposed to be objective, and it's supposed to be rational as opposed to emotional, as opposed to subjective, as opposed. And at one point, I felt a bit alienated in this world of total objectivity, of total truth, of total scientific truth. And I think this should be challenged as well. I think we should be very much aware of the fact that technology we create and the science we create, they are also coming from people. And those people are having their ontological position, they have their subjectivity, and they implement their subjectivity into systems which multiply their point of views. And this is very important to acknowledge, because then this is what we see of the world, and those behaviors are reinforced by the technology we create. And that's why I think it should be diversely represented, because people making the technology are people who have a lot of power to change the world.
And it's really interesting, and that was actually my question for you, because obviously we see now a lot of people turning in terms of recruitment, or what is, let's use some tools. Let's use AI to solve the problem of the unconscious bias, to help us with that. The question is this going to help, or is it going to make things worse because the bias is already built in?
Well, that's a very good problem to a question. It's not a problem, it's a question to ask. We have to be aware that technology is a tool which can be used for good or for bad, of course. There is potential to eliminate bias if well researched, and if we are aware of the fact that we cannot eliminate bias. I mean, bias is going to be in every technology we implement, because any machine learning system, machine learning based systems at the moment, or AI based systems feeding on data, it's based on a selection of data or simplification model of the reality, a selection of data made by some people who made some choices. And those choices were excluding part of the reality. And yeah, so you cannot get rid of bias. It's very important to be aware that there will always be bias, and then to be very careful when using powerful tools, because they can amplify actually that bias, or it can help.
I'll just pick up on something that you mentioned regarding the pipeline, and I want to get a view from the audience, if I may. May I ask how many people in the audience are recruiters? Okay, because I think one of the things as a recruiter that we look at is our pipeline and the funnel of candidates that we try and get into that, and how to make that really as diverse and inclusive as possible. But I think we have to recognize, and there's an appreciation that once you're at the recruitment stage, you can only think about the pipeline if you've thought about the barriers that women face getting into engineering in the first place, and the challenges that people that are disabled face getting into the workplace. So we can have technologies, and that's great, but if your building's not accessible, the disabled person can't get in. If you're a person with a visual impairment, you might not be able to access the form to fill out your application. And then you have to think about what it is that we do as people to our children, and how we encourage those gender stereotypes. Because that's when it actually starts, when you're trying to encourage women to play with a Barbie doll, and you're encouraging boys to play with cars. And it means that when they're going to school and university, they're choosing subjects that once we get to the pipeline stage, we're not going to have the numbers that we need in order to fill the position. So we have to think about where the pipeline starts, and it is at day one of somebody's birth.
I'd also connect to that and offer as a perspective that I think the work doesn't start with diversity, but the work should actually start with inclusion. I do think being inclusive is a prerequisite for being able to even be diverse as an organization, basically because of the examples that Jamie just mentioned. If you don't provide opportunities for people to use gender-neutral bathrooms, to even access your building, how are you even going to get diverse at any point?
And I would add to that I think inclusion is largely about being uncomfortable and your willingness to be or to tolerate a certain amount of discomfort. And I think that's not discussed enough, because we can discuss the pipeline and ways to strengthen it all evening, but at the end of the day, if you have a pipeline and you're still not able to find the right fit with your semi-homogeneous organization, then the problem is really not talent. The problem is the willingness of the group that's making these decisions to include people that may or may not mirror the people who are already there.
Jen, you looked like you wanted to say something.
I do, yeah. I think you often hear people talking about cultural fit when you're hiring new people, and it's like, does that mean someone that's the same as all the rest of us that work there, so it's easy to get along with them? And I think often in startups there's this idea you should all be friends, but maybe you don't need to be friends to work together.
That's actually a really good point, the whole cultural fit discussion. I don't know who here hires for cultural fit. Is that a good concept, or does that not just mean I just hire again people who are like me and I like to hang out with? Or should it be something like cultural contribution, or should it be something more around values, that we have shared values? What are your views on this?
So it's a really good question, and in many organizations, one of the first topics I was focusing on is defining what does cultural fit, or please can we call it differently, mean. And it ended up by sticking to recruiting by company values when they are defined and lived and are known by heart by the teams, and thinking about giving responsibility to hiring teams, educating them how to interview in the standardized way, but also thinking, why should you hire for a person who would be just like you? What kind of innovation and new perspective this person will bring to the table? And flip that cultural fit, let's all have beer and be friends, to, okay, what does this person bring new to the table? What does this person bring to the company? And hey, that's that has to be seen as an asset. So again, why companies should be diverse, it should start really from the top and being a part of the values of the company and being really trickled down and lived on a daily basis, and not just by PR demographics and boasting that, oh, we are so many nationalities and we increased our percentage of women. It's all about mindset and openness to include the new perspectives again.
I like to focus on challenges and cultural challenges rather than cultural fit, in the sense that I think in the hiring situations I've been in, a much better question to ask is, how is the potential candidate going to challenge the team that they would be joining, and how are they going to challenge the organization to be better? And if you can come up with examples as to how you're going to need to have a more structured onboarding program, mentoring factored into the seniors' roles, you're going to have to accommodate someone who may dress differently than you're used to seeing people dressed in your environment. You're going to have to accommodate someone who has a family that is more present than the other members of the team. Those are challenges that make you a better team and a more inclusive team, and those are challenges that at the end of the day make your team and your organization resemble the real world. You know, if you go out onto the street and you grab a bunch of people that you'd like to have as customers, hopefully there's the same range of diverse experiences.
Whilst I don't necessarily disagree with what anybody on the panels said, I think, and I'm also aware of the fact that I may be getting a bit semantic with cultural fit versus cultural contribution. I just think one of the concerns about it that we should have is recruitment's expensive. And if you're a business owner, or you are looking at ways in which you're trying to make your business, if you're struggling financially and you're looking at your hiring process, I think one of the things that we could be at risk of doing is forgetting how that individual would feel when they joined the business. And there could be an element of tokenism. So if I join a company and I'm the only disabled person there and they've never hired a disabled person, would I leave after 6 months and because I don't feel like I fit into the company? If I am the only gay guy in the business and it's a very macho organization, am I not going to feel comfortable working there? If I'm a black person and I'm the only black person working in that office, am I going to feel comfortable? Maybe not. And I think the challenge of the organization is absolutely correct, but sometimes we also have to remember about how that person would feel coming into the business. And I think that's one of the things that worries me about getting involved in the semantics of cultural fit versus cultural contribution.
That's very interesting. And I see that Kima wants to jump in.
So I have to jump in.
Yes, please.
Because as the person who's very often the only black person in the room, or the company, or both, I think that that's very often something that the candidate is hyper aware of and the company might not be. I doubt that most recruiters are thinking about, how might this candidate feel if they're the only one who sort of has this situation or this background to bring to the table. But I feel like, again, to your point, inclusion is about considering if there's someone who's very attractive to you as a potential member of your team, and you notice that they're all alone in some respect, what does that spur you as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, as a member of the organization to try to do going forward? Beyond hiring this person, hopefully, what does that spur you to do in terms of the next round of candidates that you get and how you interact with them, and what your goals are in terms of not having to have this conversation every time you almost hire a woman, but she would be the first one. That's I think how you move on from there.
Nina?
I think to add to that, I think it's important if you use concepts like culture fit or whatever it is to be very clear and precise with everyone involved in the hiring process what that means, because it's become a buzzword. And it's often become an apology for hiring people that are going to challenge you as an organization, for not hiring, sorry. So you need to be sure that you're very clear in that and that it's standardized how that's evaluated, because otherwise you're easily ending up with removing people from the process because somebody's gut feeling about them is just not right, and that's not something that you want in that.
Thank you. And how can we then actually ensure that once we've hired the people, and I mean, I just saw a study by UNESCO that says that actually 53% of women who join the tech industry leave within the first 10 years, because that's the kind of thing, right? Walking through the door, how do they feel? Not, and we do want to hire them. So what do we do also that the people on the team are open to be challenged also by a new perspective? Because, I mean, what I've also seen a lot is where maybe a whole industry open up themselves for, let's hire people that maybe didn't go to the same universities as us, maybe people with different skin colors, maybe even women. And nonetheless, you can close your eyes and you listen to them and you wouldn't actually know that they didn't come from the elite universities and weren't kind of middle class certain way. That was very much my experience in the UK. So what do you do that they can actually have that full potential, that they do feel included? I mean, surely it needs to go beyond just having gender-neutral toilets.
It also starts with making them feel that they are heard. Their opinion matter very much, and their opinion matter for designing the solutions of the future. Their thoughts are important for actually shaping the future of the technology. Technology is not a static thing; it's an evolving thing. And as I said, I think the mindset at the moment is not very inclusive. It's just like propagating a certain type of mind, like a certain stereotype. The majority were white men creating technologies, so they've developed their tools in their image in a certain way. So that's why it's very difficult, perhaps, for some women to integrate into the environment.
Something that I always look for is there a robust policy for reporting if you have sexual harassment or any other kind of harassment, and how is that going to be dealt with? Because if there's no policy, that's kind of a red flag for me. Or to understand if you're entering a kind of macho work environment, which some tech companies are, what is in place to actually help you deal with stuff that might happen?
So I would say that recruiting is a first step, but it cannot be the only step where we invite diverse people to join the company and then abandon them. I've unfortunately heard too many stories of people from underrepresented groups who were very much cheered during the recruiting process. They were offered very nice jobs, and it all sounded really amazing at the start. And then they came to the office and say, "Okay, here's your desk, here's your laptop, and start working." And they never felt welcome or properly onboarded. So when we talk about candidate experience, I really like to extend that to a general people experience in a company, and also having certain mechanisms, as Jan mentioned. So I was lucky to work in some organizations like SoundCloud or Native Instruments, where there were so-called diversity resource groups, which were bottom-up initiatives for employees to gather around certain topics. So for women in engineering, queer folks, people of color, and also women who were trying to get into executive positions. At Native Instruments, what was something that really positively surprised me is that the code of conduct is a part of your job offer. And while signing your contract, you read the statement, you agree to it, and you know that if something goes wrong and you comply to the diversity statement and that you are protected legally by HR if something like that happened. And this gives a very strong message from the beginning. At some companies, still a discussion, should we have any reporting policy or not? And I think this is already creating some kind of safer space, especially in the music tech industry. It's still somehow perceived as a boys' club, young, creative, around 30 years old, who listen to techno, basically. So yeah, bottom-up initiatives sponsored by the executive mindset that they want diversity, and then again mechanisms that in case something happens, you are protected and you know where to go to.
I wanted to add that I feel like on the one hand, culture is set by the leadership. You know, it comes from the top. On the other hand, I think it's really important to note that since starting Frauenloop and having lots and lots of recruiters and HR people and folks who are more woke and aware of the need for some type of increased diversity, who are curious about women, various backgrounds, various paths into technology careers, they're always asking for references and for recommendations because everybody would like to hire, I think, more diversity in the tech scene in Berlin. On the student side, the women that I meet every week in my classes, they're asking about culture. They're asking me not, am I going to get to work with this cool technology? What's the CEO? How large is the investment from the VC that's backing this company? They're asking, how do they treat people? How can I expect to be treated if I'm coming from a different country, if I'm wearing a headscarf, if my visa depends on this job offer? And what do you know about how this company is dealing with other either persons in my same situation or with people generally? What's their reputation? And I feel like that's sometimes a disconnect where the companies feel like if they put enough pictures of, you know, kicker tables and free soft drinks, everybody's going to run to them. And in fact, it's very little to do with the perks, and it's everything to do with what's the environment, whether you're coming in with a PhD and no work experience, or you're coming in as a career changer who just wants to get inside of the tech industry.
So how can you drive that culture? I mean, whose responsibility is? You said already the leadership, but what are examples that you have seen where you say these are good ways to do it?
Well, I think a really good example is actually Slack. They don't have a diversity and inclusion officer or coordinator, yet they excel in all of their targets or their quotas or making sure that their company is diverse and is fully represented. And I think, you know, there's a lot to learn from that. Insofar as the responsibility, if you speak to people that work at Slack, they say it's not necessarily the leadership that's responsible. It's everybody in the company has a part of the ownership of their D&I strategy. And I think that in order for these types of initiatives to be successful, people need to feel ownership of it, and that it's not just a top-down thing, or it's not just led by HR, because then it's not real, it's fake, and people are not going to buy into it. It will turn out to just being, going to Pride, and it will turn into just that type of event scenario, as opposed to changing the culture in which somebody works in.
So I like the definition of culture as the behaviors you reward and punish, because that's what in the end sets, well, what happens in the company. I think codes of conduct are a great example of something that's really useful, because it exactly lines out which behaviors are desired and which aren't, and what the consequences are. I think, honestly, much of inclusion comes down to process. You need processes in place, especially if you don't want people to feel like they need to ask for exceptions, so they're the only one who needs to go on parental leave, who needs to be out for childcare, or any other basically case of making people feel like they are the only one in their situation. And process is something that should be owned across the organization, including setting those standards, guidelines, processes, but also in enforcing them. And I do think there needs to be ownership. So I think grassroots initiatives across the organization are great, and they need support. But I also think it needs, well, in the end, money. And there was, at the start of this thing, there was this comment that hopefully diversity is not going to be expensive. I think it is, and I think it's rightfully so. Probably not that expensive, but I think putting the money where your mouth is, and putting the money where, well, the diverse group of people who's on your company website potentially is supposed to be at some point, is an important thing, and that's why it needs backing across the organization.
Jen? Yeah?
I just wanted to add as well that we don't need to only hire more diverse people, we need pay equity as well, that people are getting paid the same that the straight white guys are getting paid across all levels, and also that we don't just have people in customer support, for example, who represent a more diverse group of experiences. We need things at all levels of the company hierarchy.
And that's often an issue we see, don't we? I mean, even if we do hire people in a very diverse way, we often, the higher up it goes in the hierarchy, it often becomes a much different way of seeing. So the question is also, how do you really develop your diverse leadership? How do you develop a really kind of senior talents in your organization?
I think internal growth frameworks are really important in that. So having standardized processes for career development, things like career ladders, career frameworks can be really useful in that, to set expectations with folks and actually guide them towards learning and growing. Having feedback processes in place, in fostering a good feedback culture in your team that actually means people can learn from each other and learn together. And providing opportunities for people internally. So not just looking externally to hire the great new talent, but also growing people that you have already. Hire juniors. So many junior software developers have a super hard time finding jobs in Berlin because so many companies don't want to invest in them, and I think it's an issue.
Actually, I want to tie that to retention, because I think that's one of the big issues that continually pops up on my radar when I hear from recruiting people who are having such a difficult time not only getting new people in the door, but also retaining the people that they've hired, whatever their backgrounds may be. And in a sense, I always wonder why there's so much resistance, which I found as well, to hiring junior developers, junior technology professionals who might have more investment, engagement, commitment to the organizations that take them on than a more experienced person might have. Because I also see through, again, working with tech professionals who are mentoring at Frauenloop, this is a huge benefit for anybody who's experienced enough to see that they have an impact on someone more junior's career. So if you're hiring only seniors, only incredibly experienced people with the requisite 3 to 5 years in whatever framework that you work with, you're depriving them of the opportunity to make a difference, to do something beyond simply their tech job by only hiring, refusing to kind of take on people with less skills. And many people who are more skilled find that, this is one of the biggest benefits of becoming a senior team lead, of becoming someone with the opportunity to kind of pass on what you've learned. And it seems like it's such an easy win that I wonder why people who are struggling to recruit don't pitch more hiring a junior person and giving the more senior people the opportunity to mentor.
I'd like to link back also to recruiting because I've been involved in different processes, especially in tech. I would say even for software, but also for hardware, which seems even less inclusive stereotypically. In the positions starting from managers to even VPs or executive level. And a good example I've had is when working with headhunting agencies or executive search, you really brief them that you want to see a diverse pipeline, because it's also such a bias that the higher you go up the rank, there is less people. Of course, quoting the average stay in tech for women, 10 years and drop, it's more difficult, but don't compromise for time. It's so difficult to push for that sometimes in the businesses that they say, okay, we need that person now. But if you permit, searches for executive people in Berlin can take up to months. So why not being more persistent, looking into the companies also that have succeeded in hiring people in the higher leadership roles. So yes, diverse people exist, and don't be misled that. I'm a big fan of traineeship and internship programs and hiring junior developers, but it has to be balanced, because when you hire junior developers but they don't have a role model to look up for higher up the ranks, it's also not sending a good message about the company, about the development. So the more you invest as well into diversifying your executive teams, and I think this is one of the biggest struggles of Berlin-based companies. It's often German, middle-aged folks that are sitting there, but fortunately, it's changing, and the mindset is also like, we need to diversify our decision making and driving the leadership.
I would also like to add to the fact, like, why are so many women leaving from tech, or why is not enough diversity? Why some people are leaving out certain cultures, certain companies with certain cultures? And I think, as a scientist, I see an opportunity here to learn from failure. I think studies perhaps should be conducted on learning, on asking those people why did they leave, and then maybe artificial intelligence could even help here to find some patterns in the recurring behavior of like leaving a certain working place.
Interesting. How do you feel about quotas? Should we have quotas to get people into positions?
Well, if everybody is included in a quota of one kind or another, then quotas are fine. The problem is that you can easily use quotas the way that they've been used for years in the States, and that means you have quotas to fill your marketing department, your PR, and your reception and executive assistants, and then you're all done. Your quota's filled. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to avoid in terms of the roadmap, the professional mentorship, and the sort of representation amongst the leadership that's lacking. Quotas are not going to solve that problem because, as they are simply numbers to put somewhere in your organization so that you don't get sued, or you look a little bit better than other organizations that haven't implemented quotas. I don't think that's the answer, and I don't think they address the main issues, which are how do you make people feel included so they stay, and how do you create some kind of roadmap and some kind of model for what success can look like for different kinds of people. Maybe not everybody at all times, but different kinds of people, and not all the same kind of person.
I agree. Also, I think with quotas, if you have them, people who are hired might question themselves, am I hired because of a quota, which is kind of insulting. And other people might question, oh, is this person just here because they fulfill some kind of quota? And it's just a very unwelcoming way to enter into an organization.
It's not really inclusion then, is it?
Well, I want to just maybe flip it a little bit, and I want to ask, does everybody know that there are quotas in Germany for hiring disabled people? So quotas do exist for disabled people, and actually, if you look at the evidence, if you were to compare the disability employment gap in Germany, which is the difference between the employment rates of non-disabled people and disabled people, I think if you were to compare Germany's stats to those that do not have quotas, maybe like the UK, for example, where their employment gap is 40%, it shows that there is an element of the fact that the quotas are successful, and it does protect or give opportunities to people that are perhaps more unlikely to receive employment, like people with learning disabilities, for example. So I think it's really it's unfavourable for us to just dismiss quotas for everybody when we can actually see a success. Now, if you do dig a little bit deeper into the data relating to that, there are some questions to be asked about how authentic those percentages are. But I think there are certain benefits for people that would not have an opportunity of work otherwise.
I agree that quotas can be a good means to an end. I do think that it's important to, again, ensure that the pipeline, which starts somewhere in hiring but also extends into how long people stay at your organization, that again means you're not doing it for the numbers, but you're actually ensuring that you don't have a toxic environment, which means that people are going to drop out of your pipeline again.
Thank you. So I'd really like to hear some of the success stories, and I'm also really interested to hear a bit more, Nakima, if I can start with you. If you could tell us a little bit more about FoundLoop and what have been kind of the successes with the graduates of that, and how can people actually reach out? Because I'm sure there are lots of people saying, oh, how can I get these women?
Well, we just had on Monday evening the last of, wow, the sun is super bright right now. We had on Monday evening a class where some of our alumni who've been employed full-time in Berlin came back and talked about their experiences. And that was really cool because what we saw from the woman who's working in web development at Acclamio, the woman who's working in data engineering at Wimdu, and the woman who just started doing machine learning and consultant work at Tromsdorf and Druna, is that they all said, I feel as if the biggest challenge for me was getting comfortable with the idea that I'm going to have to sell myself as something I didn't study for a really long time. I didn't start off as a computer scientist. I didn't do a traditional route into the tech industry, but all of these women have immigrant or refugee backgrounds, and all of these women pretty much said that the main thing that they got from coming to Frauenloop was to see that, every week you're seeing women who are working in the tech industry, like myself, and they're coming, in most cases, straight from their jobs, and they're telling you not only these are the types of problems you need to be comfortable with, these are the kinds of situations that you might deal with on a team, but this is the dynamic, and this is the focus of an organization that's trying to make revenue from the software that they're building, or the analysis that they're selling, or that they're performing on their users and on their products. And so these are the kinds of things that are very, very difficult to bluff if you're coming from outside of the tech industry and you're learning online or you're doing sort of self-study. These are the things that make it much easier, at least so they say, for women to feel as though I can do this because I know that these women may or may not have had a traditional computer science background, and they're telling me that I can do this. So a lot of what the success stories are about is about women having the courage to go through this process, to deal with the rejections if they're being rejected, to deal with the people who may or may not be appreciative of their skills, especially since they're mostly career changers, or to find ways to be confident as the next person who's doing the development job, the analysis job, the machine learning job, because you know that everybody's learning on the job. So it's okay to be that person who has a solid grasp of their skills and they're ready to learn.
And how were they actually got? Did you help them in the recruitment process, or
Of course.
how do people find them? Is it through the website?
It's through the website mostly. We're doing outreach to consulting firms and sort of larger organizations right now, but primarily, again, because the focus of most of these women is how do I feel comfortable about the companies that I'm applying to. I do a lot of screening, I do a lot of meetings, I go and check out a lot of work environments to see if it's a very homogenous, non-inclusive kind of space, and the people who I'm interacting with are just looking to fill a slot, or if there seems to be some kind of framework, or they're willing to work on creating a framework in which a junior or a mid-level developer or data analyst could move into and thrive. Because it's about longevity, and I think the thing that I'm always talking about in terms of Frauenloop is, you're looking for ways to not have job openings there for 6 months and longer because you can't find the person who exactly fits this level of expertise. What you're trying to do is cut short the recruitment time by bringing in people who might need a little bit more support at the beginning, but they're going to stick around and they're going to put in the work because they're already doing that by coming to Frauenloop.
Thank you. Sounds really exciting. Diane, you look like you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it's great, and I think those techniques for success can be very well complemented with the techniques for failure. As I said, they are the two sides of the same coin, and I think sometimes we are a bit too biased towards the people who succeed, the people who made it but then we forget perhaps sometimes that perhaps they are the exceptions, the one who manage to remain somewhere. And if we want to tackle the problems, we have to understand also why other people failed, so that we can address those problems as well.
I really admire and agree with you, Nakima, and with your program. And we know each other for quite some time from different organizations. One success story I'd like to share, maybe two, was a developer bridge program at SoundCloud, which originated from one of these diversity resources groups thinking, yes, we want to give opportunities for people who are transitioning out from different careers and going into development. We opened up 7 traineeships, and the job post was very inclusive, was out for only 1 month, and it was stated about 600 people applied, and we made sure that the job post was promoted, for instance, at Ready School of Digital Integration, communities of underrepresented groups. The screening process was including, the CV was visible only at the last stage of the process, so it started really with some tasks and blind assessments, which I really appreciated. And the last phase consisted of an open day for the finalists to focus really on working style, communication, and collaboration with the team. And the success is that after 1 year of this traineeship, some people left during the traineeship because they were already so knowledgeable, so happy with their skills that they found another job somewhere else. So we can't blame them for that. And 5 people graduated from it and got a full-time position at SoundCloud. Whereas at Native, one of our biggest missions in the product is making music tech more accessible, and we opened up some of the development positions for people with disabilities. This year we hired a full team in London, and they focus on making our instruments accessible to people with vision impair, and we also hosted 2 weeks of sessions and open talks on hack days focusing on that topic. So it's also about opening up for the wider community and networking on the topics that matter for all of us, and also competitors and everyone in the scene.
And whoops, can you still hear me? And it's really interesting, right? I mean, the blind coding, how this has also been taken from the orchestras that do blind auditions. What a different, I mean, we all know the Voice of Germany or Voice of, but that effect you have when you actually see someone's talent before you can have any sort of conscious or unconscious bias is quite amazing. Any other success stories that you want to share from Berlin or wider field, Jamie?
There's an initiative or a group, Code Bar. Don't know if everybody is familiar with it. At Signavio, we have a number of our developers that give up their spare time. We were talking earlier about who owns diversity and inclusion, and it's for everybody to be a part of it. So I think that's an initiative. If you're not aware of it, certainly pass that on to some of your developers and the companies that you work for, because they get to share their knowledge and improve the tech stack or the experience of other engineers from that may not have that level of experience in order to get employed.
And Jen, if I can just come to you, because you come in from a little bit of a different angle. Just tell us a little bit about your experience before we throw it to the audience to ask for some Q&A. But just your experience about from the product side and how to maybe create there more of a diverse, inclusive way.
Sure. I mean, I think what your product is puts out a message to people who may want to work there or not. And in the case of Clue, it's a period tracker. And a lot of period trackers are very girly with flowers and pink and butterflies. And I was happy to join Clue because they've tried to stay away from that. And also have a goal of being more inclusive of people who menstruate, who may not identify as a woman, for example, transgender men, non-binary gender people, and there's a lot of different genders out there. So I think that's something that makes Clue special, is that we try to cater to this audience. We don't always succeed. It's an ongoing project, and it's very difficult because the science around health, if you have a uterus and ovaries, it's very gendered, and diseases are very gendered. So it's something that we're working on. So my experience is sort of, I don't know why, but I took it upon myself to first of all write more content that was relevant I think a lot of period tracking apps are focused on heterosexual people that want to get pregnant, especially cisgender women. But we're trying to look at people, there's so many different reasons that people might want to track their period, whether it's to do with health conditions or just understanding their body better, or many more things. So first of all, writing on our website articles that address different people's experiences, and then also in the app trying to be less heteronormative, trying to remove all this gendered language saying, oh, it's your lady time, which is kind of in a lot of other of these sort of apps. And I think that we get a lot of nice positive feedback on social media, and also people helpfully pointing out where we failed, which is very useful and kind of them to engage.
It's the failing again, isn't it? That's really interesting. So while this might be quite a niche product, so to speak, I mean, I don't know.
Well, 50%
50% of women are. I don't know if they're all menstruate. Anyway, moving from that away. But it's quite interesting to just kind of look also at the products, right, of a company, of a business, to see how inclusive are actually the products, and also how do the products maybe drive the employer brands, and what does that actually mean for people who do they want to join that organization or not, and how do they feel working there? If they're working there and it's, as you said, I wouldn't have wanted to join something that wasn't like that because I'm not like that. So that's quite interesting. Nina, you want to?
Well, just to connect to the success stories briefly, I've been working in a lot of software developer-centered companies over the last years. And one thing as a kind of encouragement regarding how company culture actually also impacts the pipeline you're working with. One thing I've seen is that companies who are very vocal about their culture, who are very also public about the code of conduct they have the processes, the alcohol they ban from their events, the diversity they have already in their teams, and the diversity they're aspiring to, it's something that people know. So applicants will know what company culture you have, and if you're deliberate about it, it will attract more diverse talent. And I've interviewed so many people who have said, listen, the company culture is one of the main reasons why I want to work with you. And seeing that is a really rewarding thing, and is even more of an encouragement to be very deliberate about the culture that you're setting.
I think that's a really good point, and to link perhaps the two discussions relating to the product as well. At Signavio, our product is a business process management tool in the B2B sector. It's maybe not the sexiest thing to talk about, and people obviously when they're applying for the jobs, they want to know a little bit more. And I think when you are telling people and candidates about the culture, it is really important to emphasize that. And then obviously we tell them that part of the product is collaboration and making things more transparent. So the face of it is a little bit different when you dig a bit deeper into what our product actually is. Just selling the Signavio product there. And it's nice to see everybody because we can see now.
Great. Thanks.
I wanted to add that I think it's really important to note that just because you might not be the most diverse and inclusive organization today doesn't mean that you can't become that. And it doesn't mean that you can't reach out and share the vision that you might have of a different kind of group of stakeholders, a different kind of group of customers, and certainly a different kind of tech powerhouse that is part of your organization. I think that oftentimes the discussion of diversity and inclusion can be alienating to people who feel like they don't have the answers, they're not sure why they're being included, why they're being asked these questions, it's not their fault. But in fact, back to the success story kind of theme, the organization where I'm working now, Iago Digital IT, the guys that I'm managing on my development teams are saying, hey, why are we getting only guys? There's too much testosterone. Where are the women? There have to be women that are in the pipeline, and I know that you're training some. Can we get some of them coming in as juniors, as Scrum Masters? How can we get more diversity of opinions? Because this is ridiculous. So it's not that it's only one group or specific groups that are underrepresented that are doing all the work. I think there are lots of people that conform to the majority of their organizations that are also saying, hey, this may not be the best environment for us to be innovative and to do great things.
Great. So this is not the end yet. We just throw it now over to the audience for your questions.
Hey, I'm Mertjan from DCMN, and I am talent acquisition specialist externally, because internally we don't have any titles. And I come from a background of academia. I did my studies in quantitative research, and I focus on sexual minority discrimination in the labor market. But now I end up in organizations and doing people partnerships. And at DCMN, we this year try something totally different in Berlin. And I know a lot of companies doing flat hierarchies and etc. But we're really trying to do like flat hierarchies, including the decision making as well. We're trying to adapt ourselves to holacracy. So everything is running around teams. So basically, we have functional teams. We don't have any team leads. We don't have any VPs. We don't have titles. We don't have hierarchies. Everyone has like a internally approved signature right. So we have unlimited budgets. You can basically do whatever you want unless the team agrees. And we want to work also not to the cultural fit, but we call something different. We say cultural fitness, and that's kind of the target that we are always aiming. And my question is, have you ever experienced problems when it comes to diversity and inclusion in a working environment that has a holacracy where you don't have decision-making top-down but totally flat, and the teams are making decisions when it comes to hiring, including sad but firing, salaries, feedback, and all sorts of things, including vacation. What would be your advices or experiences when it comes to a working structure like that?
Who of you has had that?
I just have a short comment about this kind of flat hierarchy structure, is that often, unfortunately, you say it's flat hierarchy, but some people actually have more power. And so if this is not openly acknowledged, you can have still a hierarchy. You're just saying you don't have one. So then you can have, obviously, abuse of power as well.
Exactly what I wanted to say. So I think making power visible is really important, especially in these like very trendy flat hierarchy organizations. They're just not. Thing is that I think group dynamics, network effect, similarity effect, all are things that can really be perpetuated in such structures if you're not really careful about it. And I think there's great advantage in including everyone in making decisions, like participatory management, servant leadership, all those kinds of things have been around for a while, and I think they're great. I do think having ownership, dedicated ownership, and accountability connected with that is really key, especially as you're putting people into positions that they're not necessarily trained for, having them make decisions that they don't necessarily have the background for. And so you can easily get into a very slippery slope with that.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow panelists. Somebody's got to sign the check at the end of the day. And I think that if you're thinking about budgets for accessibility to make your company more accessible for disabled people, then it's not going to be somebody that's just started necessarily that's going to help with that decision. It's going to be somebody that's been in the organization for a while, and you know he or she's going to have to sign the check for that. So I don't necessarily agree that there is a such thing as this flat structure that's successful.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Hello, I'm a recruiter and also HR business partner for a young company in Berlin, a young startup. I recently became the team lead for the diversity team. To be honest, it's my first experience in management. I think that me and the 15 people that joined the team really soon after that don't really know where we're going. And at the end of the month, I'm going to have to present the project to the C-level. For now, well, you mentioned it earlier, the white male with white male investors only. So this is what I'm looking forward to. I'm going to have to talk to those people. And the idea is that we have no budget. So how do I discuss this topic with those people? How do I challenge diversity when most of the answers that we're getting from the C-level are, we're not aware of a problem?
Do you have any numbers, like internally, for where the state of the organization is at or something?
Yeah, what do you mean? Sorry.
So any statistics on the diversity of the organization at this point and potential goals or so?
So for now, I'm actually the one doing it with my ridiculous Excel skills, taking data from our HR tools. So I only have data that I know I can use, like for example, the men and women ratio or the management ratios, etc. So this is also like a thing I'm looking into because I just basically don't know where to find this type of documentation, what type of documentation I actually need.
I would like to say, well, it's actually a good sign that they invite you to the discussion because it's
I
not...
kind of invited myself, to be honest.
Okay, good for you. Good to mention, but in those cases, I would say when you are sitting at the table and you're presenting to a group that is completely homogeneous and is not aware of a problem, some strategy is also to look out in the organization to look for somebody who is also in a power position and will be an ally of the cause, so that you're not alone, not from being a woman representing the topic. It's often also a stereotype. So my initial reaction was like, well, great, you will be talking about it, and that's the first step. Second step is, yes, inviting people who stand for the cause. And I would add to, yes, using numbers and using business cases.
I am actually supported by the head of HR, but being myself from HR and using my boss as my support is definitely not the best idea. Also, you mentioned it yourself. If HR is the owner of the diversity project, I mean, I agree with you. That was also my first thought, but it's just that there is nothing else that actually has interest in this project yet because we are so young into this project that I need to, actually, I'm just like in the need to raise awareness to the entire company. So
I think that, firstly, like, welcome to the D&I team. It's good to have more people involved. I think that if you're speaking to them, the things that they'll like to hear is about how diversity encourages innovation and it brings them more money. So if you talk to them about those two things, and there's lots of data. I think there's a really good example. BCG's working with the Tech University of Munich at the moment, and they're doing a lot of stuff with organizations in the DACH region. And I think it's really good to look at that and pass that on to them because it shows that, you know, if there's women in leadership positions and there's a more gender diverse workforce, it does give you statistical information relating to improvements with innovation. I think I agree with other people in the panel that you need to find allies within the business. And there will be some, and encouraging them so it feels more like from the grassroots as opposed to just an HR initiative. So maybe this is a good starting point for you to have that. And I think the other thing, because it was mentioned earlier, recruitment's expensive, and D&I really helps with staff retention. So if he's got staff that he doesn't, or she, I shouldn't have presumed, they don't want to lose their key staff. So by having a good D&I strategy, it'll make sure that those staff remain. So at the end of the day, sometimes it's the money that they'll be interested to hear about.
And I would also get myself a good mentor, and it doesn't have to be in the organization, maybe even better outside the organization. There might be someone sitting here.
I would also like to add something, because I've been talking the whole evening about failure, and I think this is important for your case here as well, because there are some failures we can afford to make. You can't develop products who are not inclusive for the people who are using them. Like, you cannot develop medical equipment or like medicines who are not tested on the whole variety of people that they are going to take them, just because like the team who developed them or like the people were not diverse enough to test all the possible situation, and they're biased only towards certain archetypes. So I think, yeah, diversity, it's not only for creating innovation and for creativity, but also of avoiding like very, very important mistakes. Like in automotive domain also, like there were some critical failures, for example, when in case of accidents, the airbag was not saving the human life, but on the contrary, they were like really critical to women. They were like even like hurtful for them because they were never tested on the frame of a woman because there was no woman in the testing team. I think those are critical issues.
Thank you. I'm Antonio from Young Sustainable Impact. I'm actually a Director of International Operations and Partnerships, and I do a lot of so our company, the startup innovation and startup like acceleration for like different clients, but at the same time, we also do a lot of consultation for external clients in developing their businesses, and specifically for social inclusion, social protection, and social impact. And diversity in the workforce is one of the greater pillars of the company that I'm working for. And one thing that we do is that we actually have like 3 pillars that we try to aim for. As you said, like diversity, inclusion, and metric and tracking. As in, like diversity is one thing, and then actually how the company is including the people that they have diverse is the second stage, and the third stage is actually tracking. It's like how is that actually improving the company? Because a lot of times, like a lot of our clients would have diversity, but they wouldn't check if that's actually improving the company or worsening the company. And because we are also like a consultant company, one thing is that we try to see how efficient or how effective is our diversity implementation. So I wanted to ask if you have any opinions on where diversity is most efficient, because sometimes you can just have diversity at the secretarial level, but because they're not decision makers, they actually don't provide a lot of more input. And diversity is a lot of times attributed to a lot of innovation. And for non-innovation positions, is diversity still effective, or can there be a method by which even a non-innovative required position diversity is still effective? So what is your opinion on where diversity can be most effective or can have the most implementation power?
I honestly disagree with the underlying assumption.
Right.
So I think it's not about that, to me at least. I think diversity is relevant at all levels because it's not just about innovation. Innovation is only one aspect in which diversity is beneficial, but it's also about the background, the cultures that people add to your teams, and enriching teams through the education you bring, through your gender, through your life experiences, is in and of itself a great asset to any company, because it's overall going to contribute to how you are working as an organization. And so I think it's not about specific roles, but about, well, yeah, again, life experiences and challenges that people can bring to the teams they're in. And I think diversity needs to be just a thing at any level of the company.
Right, no, I very much agree with that personally. It's just that when I try to like consult for companies, they say, well, for this department, it's not innovative enough. It's like not an innovation required. So we don't really need diversity is what I hear. And when I actually try to like give them statistics usually say diversity increases innovation, but there's rarely any study about anything other than innovation or just or anything else that tends to be superficial data. So that's why. So it wasn't my personal perception or opinion, but it's what the data is very lacking in non-innovative forms. And when I try to convince people otherwise, get a lot of backfires.
I think why people might tend to be hesitant for diversity and share that kind of stories or points of view is that throughout most of my life, I've worked in fairly diverse teams, and even in HR, I was quite lucky to work in almost balanced male, female, and very multinational team. And of course, if you work in such a team, often, if you talk about TV series or what have you watched when you were a kid, you don't have too many common topics. Maybe you don't want to go out for a beer with those people because, there might be some conflicts and they arise all the time. But this is what makes you mature, what makes you a better professional, better colleague, and also understand the world and business a little bit more. So I think this comes from, this surface point of view that it's just those difficulties that some leaders or organization may want to see, I don't want to lose time in that team because there might be conflicts, they might not bond together, but to me it's a sign of quite toxic culture, and hiring just for this fit that we want to hire people that are exactly the same, which is not very developmental, I would say. But again, it has some value, maybe speed, maybe accessibility for getting stuff done quickly, not so much ideation phase, but yeah.
So I wanted to just quickly add that the example that I like to use most often is the meritocracy that's often talked about. I think the most recent example is in, I've forgotten her name, the book that just came out on tech bros in Silicon Valley. So I'm a PhD, and as that's a pretty valuable commodity to have here in Germany, I like to talk to people in the environments that I'm in professionally about my comfort zone. So my comfort zone is, having spent years and years and years in academia, I know a lot of PhDs. So when I start talking about specialists and experts and PhDs, of course, everyone nods and they go, okay, yeah, great, exactly, that's who we want as well. And then I happen to mention that all the PhDs I'm talking about are black women. And at that point, it's clear why I'm comfortable, because these are my friends. This is my peer group. But obviously the people who don't fit that suddenly feel like, well, that's pretty exclusionary. I mean, how about you're leaving out? And that's what I like to turn around on people, whatever your ethnicity, whatever your specific education or experiential background might be. That's what I like to turn around people who say, well, diversity is not an issue, we don't need it. It's like, but if it excludes you, the lack of diversity becomes an issue. So that's always one way of going about it, and just making the assumption that the people you're comfortable with, who are talented and capable of doing the job, everybody's going to be like that. And then see how they respond to that, that idea.
I like the reverse. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sai. I'm a non-binary person, and I'm co-organizing together with other people here in Berlin a regular meeting every month for non-binary people. And we had a meeting on Monday, and I mentioned that I was coming here, and I was interested in the topic of working in companies, and the topic was diversity. And so we talked about our reality working in companies or working environments as non-binary people, and I asked people to tell me about the experiences. And most people that told me that their experience suck. In all the companies that they work, they experience misgendering, a lot of issues. A lot of people have names that are different from the legal names, and it's very hard to either work in a company or apply for new jobs when your gender identity doesn't conform with the norm. Not only that, a lot of people don't know about this reality. A lot of people think people are just men or women. Interesting for me, when I mention I'm a front-end developer and I work freelance, a lot of recruiters tell me, you should come to my company. Nobody ever asked me about my pronoun, for example. So for me, this is kind of a light. But I noticed that we are talking in a language that is mostly from people that are in executive positions. And I think all of you are interested in diversity. And my experience talking with these people is the reality of people who are working in environments who are not interested in diversity and that are facing a lot of obstacles because either the companies they are working for are not interested in diversity or the companies that they apply for are also not interested in diversity. So I just wanted to know if you have advice or some experience you can share for people that are currently working in a company or applying to companies that are excluding them. If you have some kind of advice that I can bring back to this group so we can talk about this, how each person in their individual position can make themselves stronger, whatever they are. And that the solution is not only quit your job, find something else, because unfortunately there are not so many, there are not enough diverse companies or companies that are actively pushing for that. So I just wanted to hear if you have anything to say about that.
Great question. And after this, I would like to catch up with you because I need some advice relating to some issues that we are having really with gender-neutral pronouns in an environment where English isn't the first language. So I would like to catch up with you on that to get some advice. But I think at Signavio, all our board are white men. All are German white men. Actually, there's one French guy. But they're all white men. And it's it's a Berlin startup. It's one of the success stories. And it's not a case that the C-level team didn't necessarily avoid discussing D&I. They just actually didn't understand the benefits that it would bring. So that's part of the responsibility that I have in terms of trying to I mentioned to somebody else earlier about trying to find an ally and other people within the organization, and I think it's that collective, because you're stronger together, and when you're speaking with more people, it's not just an individual issue, which obviously is important, but when it's you've got that solidarity, it speaks more. They'll listen more is basically what I'm trying to say. So I think step one would be trying to identify other people with that believe what you believe, and then bring a case forward on that basis. So that would be the first step.
I also would like to say that legal side is on your side, at least in Germany, and since this year there is a legal requirement, I don't think too many companies are complying to that, of listing FMN abbrevial at the end of the job post. And actually, there are ways about being more inclusive and creative about it. But as a recruiter, I'm really interested in improving the candidate experience for everyone. I'm generally interested in hearing from every candidate, the ones that rejected our offer or who withdrew from a process, also those who accepted. How can we improve? And many times I've heard things that were very constructive, that were new to me, and this really enriched my skills, and I fed this back to the teams. Also listen from the hiring teams what we could have done better. So it's like a constant learning process. And I think often the candidates really fear to be on that side of giving feedback to the organizations. But hey, you're also very seeked out in the market, and companies really have to comply with the not only law but certain standards. So encouraging people to be more vocal. It's not your responsibility to educate recruiters, but I'm also aware that the standard, like the level of service, is not always at the same level. So looking for an organization which is open to receive feedback is always a good sign, at least as a starting point.
I just want to add that there's a popular saying now that if you don't see it, you can't be it, or if you can't be it if you don't see it. And a lot of people like to say that that's a good argument for representation. Everybody needs to see themselves represented. It makes it easier. It's more inspiring for candidates from various backgrounds. Reality is everybody's not going to see themselves represented. I'm working in a German company. There's nobody like me in the company. There's nobody like me in the headquarters. When I go to Düsseldorf and I visit headquarters, the people of color I see are cleaning toilets. And that's it. So that might not be the same for a non-binary person. You might not see anybody at all that you can recognize that identifies similarly. But I feel like in a lot of ways, you do have to be ready for advocating for yourself, seeing which organizations are open to your skills and what you bring to the table, and sharing that information with others in your community so that more people feel empowered to get through the whole process. Because the reality is that the process is often terrible at tech companies, regardless of your background. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your experience that's making it terrible. It could just be a terrible recruiting process. And I agree that feedback is super important, and you should feel empowered to give it always.
Thank you. Yeah, I think. Oh, hello. Thank you. I think it's great you have this group so you can support each other. And I think with non-binary, it's not necessarily a visible thing. So there may be a lot of people who are non-binary in different organizations, but are not visible or are not out or are not talking a lot about it. And I think maybe you can use the power of this group that you have together, not only to support each other, but to maybe leverage that in terms of maybe like making a list of which companies are welcoming and knowledgeable about non-cisgender experience, and maybe sort of, I don't know, name and shame or encourage people to be as woke as is fashionable these days. That's just one idea. But I want to come and talk to your group as well.
Thanks.
Just one thing that I really want to, that's quite close to me because you said the word shaming. I do think there's just a lot of blind spots. People don't necessarily mean to be exclusive. So I think it's also about when we do meet this to be open and engaging and curious to help people to realize that they also have those blind spots and help them maybe to have a perspective change because they might just not have that experience. And I think it's a beautiful thing because once your perspective has changed, you can't go back to the way that you saw things. And I think that's what we need more in the world. That's why I really say, you know, we need to push more for conscious inclusion to actually actively have that, because once I spend time with someone, you know, that is different to me in whatever way, it'll be very difficult to kind of go back to my little box.
Yeah, I agree that shame isn't the best word choice. And there's a lot of people who really want to learn and are looking for help.
I mean, I kind of would just want to add to that. I think given the power imbalance that you're facing when you're applying for a company, it can be really hard to give feedback on a hiring process or on like the behaviors you've experienced. I mean, I feel like Berlin startup culture is pretty behind when it comes to even recognizing that there's more than two genders, yet alone things like microaggressions, misgendering, and other topics. And I think honestly finding support within companies, wherever you can, finding mentoring, finding people who can vouch for you, and finding people who can support you in finding a way into the system and navigating it could be potentially really useful because it can be really hard.
Yeah, thank you. We ended up talking a lot about mental health actually because the recruiting process or the applying process is not exhausting by itself, but also educating other people about these things is even more exhausting. So yeah.
Yes, it is.
So having a group is very helpful, it's true. Thank you.
Hi, I'm the last one, no worries. So my name is Anastasia. I'm working with Zalando and in the recruitment team as the recruitment coordinator. And first of all, I wanted to thank you for raising a lot of important topics and talking about them, expressing your ideas. Among them, there was also cultural fit topic mentioned, and also how we can prepare the team and people in the company for diversity that might come to them or not come. I'm a very pragmatic person, and I always start to think, okay, there is the problem, how we can prepare a German-speaking team for somebody who is coming and speaking English and no German at all. And I was thinking, okay, what is your idea maybe on implementing workshops on diversity and intercultural communication as a must during the onboarding? Because obviously a lot of these workshops end up in just, oh, don't say this, don't say that, and so on. So I would be really curious to hear your opinion about that.
I hate intercultural trainings. That's very kind of, but a lot of them I find they just reaffirm stereotypes, as you said. It's like, ooh, and they're like this, and they're. It's really funny when I have these conversations with my coachees who have that, go through that and say, oh, I just learned about Germans. Let me tell you what I learned about, and I'm like, oh, thank you very much. So I would rather maybe do something around unconscious bias and how to manage that and how that impacts the way that we interact and how that is. I would more look for commonalities than differences also to see
this is what you said on the meetup the other.
What do we actually have in common rather than, you know, what is different about us, so that we kind of, you know, we take the walls down rather than to build them up. That's just my view.
There is also a workshop format. I completely agree with you that commonalities and looking into common experience within a group is a great way of making these challenges and issues visible. There's a very nice workshop which starts with a story of my name, and if you have a multicultural group, you know, my name is very different also from how I present myself in Germany or Brazil or Spain, where I used to live, because simply it's very difficult to pronounce. And I mean, I even don't use it because in Poland it's very, very difficult to have like 3 different names. And from there you start saying, okay, everyone has this particular story, even about the name. And then you take it even deeper to an empathy discussion, thinking, okay, so you come from this and that part of the world. What kind of stereotypes were you faced with? Do you mind sharing? And then you go a little bit deeper, and you also talk about a topic called pigeonholing. This is a statement where people trying to be nice and inclusive sometimes just stereotype and label you instead of being open. So this is actually a very nice format of a workshop where you can get people closer and more understanding by having these common experiences, because almost everyone at some point in their life have been labeled or mistreated somehow. And then it's more personal, and it's not only theory and don't say this or that kind of experience for them.
I would like to also add something to this, because I also have a background in performance making and theater. And I think theater and role-playing is a very powerful tool to actually embody experience and rehearse social interactions. And it gives you like a reference map. It gives you like a way of empathizing with the other and putting yourself in another person's shoes. And I think they can be very powerful tool to use actually also perhaps like in creating a certain culture or a certain environment, but it's very much depending on the type of workshop and the way it is structured, how it's moderated, and yeah.
So I half disagree with what the other said. I think workshops can be really useful. I think they need to be really goal-oriented and focused on equipping people with practical skills they can use in their daily work. So I think, so I'm potentially not disagreeing, sorry. But instead of having it a thing that you only do during onboarding and people have to get it over with, using air quotes here, you can't hear that in the recording, it needs to be something that's a recurring thing. It can't just be a one-off. And I also think that any workshops or so that you do are completely useless if you don't have processes to back them up. So if you don't make sure that people continuously work to get better at how they work together, that these things are evaluated, that it's part of performance reviews or feedback that people get, that you actually check if people live up to the culture that you want to see and set within the company, and not just make it a one-off that people have to pass.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think you can't really have enough opportunities to educate people, and I think that I'll also disagree about looking at what we have in common, because as a disabled rights activist, I'm a proud disabled person, and if we don't acknowledge the fact that I have a disability, then the barriers that I face are not going to be removed. So we have to address some of the differences that we do have. And as a gay man, there's stats that show that people within the LGBTI plus community don't get the same promotional opportunities as non-LGBTI folks. So I think that if we don't acknowledge that there are differences, then we're not going to actually make any change. So we have to be quite proud and actually open and challenge people on it.
And I wouldn't disagree with you, but if I have had some kind of connection with you, and this is when we look, this is what I mean, when we look at something, just one thing we have in common, and I've made that connection. I can see you completely different as a human being with your differences, your needs, your wishes, your motivations. And that's what I sometimes find when we start at a point where it's about how are we different and how do we therefore have to kind of behave in a certain way. That's where I have an issue. Another thing, I think it's when it's also based on what are our strengths we bring to, like something like StrengthsFinder or something, where people really learn to appreciate that there's a real strength in what you bring different to the table. Then that's also something I find that often makes people see each other differently and more appreciative.
I wanted to add that I think that if we're talking about role-playing and we're talking about making a more regular process of including these role plays and these exercises to drive or encourage empathy, role-playing different roles within the organization, within the team, is a really great way to make people aware of the different pressures and the different processes of decision-making that most organizations have, and that you would not necessarily have an opportunity to consider when interacting with your manager, a junior person on your team, unless you're in a role play kind of situation.
And with that response from Dr. Steffelbauer, so ended the live recording on the evening.
Thank you for listening. That was HR4Diversity, Fostering Diversity in the Workforce. We'd be really happy to hear any of your feedback, and you can share this via our social media channels, including Twitter, that's talent_io_de, or LinkedIn or Facebook.
And indeed, if you are looking to hire from a diverse pool of tech talent and your company is located in one of the following cities, Berlin, Hamburg, London, Paris, Lyon, Lille or Bordeaux, then look no further than talent.io. We are the selective recruitment platform where you can connect directly to a selection of pre-screened and pre-qualified tech talent of all levels and disciplines directly. Sign up for free at talent.io.
Thanks very much.